When we begin to reflect on the state of our world today, we cannot ignore the growing unease that is settling across nations. It is not a sudden fear, nor is it born out of imagination. Rather, it is the result of patterns that history has shown us time and time again. If you study the past carefully, you will realize that global conflicts do not erupt overnight. They build gradually through tension, mistrust, and the steady breakdown of communication. And what we are witnessing today is alarmingly Arabic, Meme Arabic, Sheen Arabic, Alif Arabic, Ba Arabic, Ha to those very patterns. Across different regions of the world, powerful nations are no longer merely competing, they are confronting one another, sometimes directly, and other times through proxies. Political disagreements are intensifying, economic rivalries are deepening, and military presence is expanding in sensitive regions. These are not isolated developments, they are interconnected pieces of a much larger puzzle. When major powers begin to draw lines, form alliances, and assert dominance, history teaches us that the consequences can be far-reaching. Look at how alliances are shifting. Countries are choosing sides more openly now, strengthening partnerships not just for cooperation, but for strategic positioning. And while alliances in themselves are not dangerous, the problem arises when they create clear divisions, when the world begins to split into opposing blocks. This us versus them mentality has always been one of the early warning signs of global conflict. It reduces the space for dialogue and increases the likelihood of confrontation. What makes this situation even more concerning is how small regional conflicts are no longer contained within their borders. A dispute between two nations can quickly draw in others, either through defense agreements or political interests. What begins as a localized issue can escalate into something far greater, simply because of the interconnected nature of today's world. We are living in an age where one spark, if not controlled, can ignite a fire that spreads beyond imagination. And perhaps the most worrying aspect is not just the presence of tension, but the normalization of it. People are becoming accustomed to hearing about conflicts, threats, and rising hostility, as though it is just another part of daily life. But we must not become desensitized. Awareness is the first step toward prevention. If we ignore the signs, we risk repeating the very mistakes that led humanity into devastating wars in the past. As Yasir Qadhi often emphasizes in his reflective style, understanding history is not merely about knowledge, it is about wisdom. It is about recognizing patterns so that we can change our future. And right now, those patterns are becoming increasingly clear. The tension is real, the divisions are growing, and the stakes are higher than ever before. If we do not take these signs seriously, then we may find ourselves asking, too late, how the world once again allowed itself to reach the brink. As we continue to reflect on the direction in which our world is heading, we must also confront a reality that is perhaps even more alarming than rising tensions, and that is the nature of warfare itself. War today is no longer what it once was. It is no longer confined to soldiers on battlefields or tanks crossing borders. The very definition of conflict has evolved, and with that evolution comes a level of danger that humanity has never experienced before. In the past, even in the midst of global wars, there were limits, geographical limits, technological limits, and sometimes even moral limits. But today, many of those boundaries have either disappeared or become dangerously blurred. The weapons that nations now possess are not just tools of defense. They are instruments of unimaginable destruction. A single decision, a single moment of miscalculation, could lead to consequences that cannot be reversed. Consider the presence of nuclear weapons. These are not theoretical threats. They are very real, and they exist in abundance. The destructive power of even one such weapon is enough to devastate entire cities, to wipe out generations, and to leave scars on the earth that last for decades. And yet, multiple nations continue to expand and modernize their arsenals. This is not just preparation, it is a silent escalation, one that increases the risk with every passing day. But warfare today is not limited to what we can see. There is an invisible battlefield that operates around us constantly: cyber warfare. Nations now have the capability to disrupt entire economies, disable critical infrastructure, and manipulate information without ever firing a single shot. Imagine a world where power grids fail, communication networks collapse, and financial systems are thrown into chaos. All not by bombs, but by lines of code. This is no longer a distant possibility. It is a present reality. And then there is the rise of artificial intelligence in military strategy. Machines are being developed that can make decisions faster than humans, analyze threats in real time, and even control weapons systems. While technology can be beneficial, the question we must ask ourselves is this: what happens when the control slips? What happens when speed replaces judgment and automation replaces human conscience? The margin for error becomes dangerously thin. Even space, once a symbol of exploration and hope, is now being viewed as a potential domain for conflict. Satellites that guide communication, navigation, and security could become targets, further expanding the battlefield beyond our planet. This means that war, if it were to break out on a global scale, would not be limited to one region, one domain, or one method. It would be everywhere, all at once. What makes all of this so deeply concerning is not just the power of these technologies, but the speed at which decisions must be made in such an environment. There is less time for reflection, less room for diplomacy, and greater pressure to act quickly. And in such a high-stakes scenario, even a small misunderstanding or a technical glitch could trigger a chain reaction with catastrophic consequences. We are living in a time where the tools of war have surpassed the limits of human restraint, and if wisdom does not guide power, then power itself becomes the greatest threat. As we reflect on these growing tensions and the dangerous evolution of warfare, we must now turn our attention to what truly lies at the heart of it all: the impact on humanity itself. Because when we speak about war, it is easy to become absorbed in discussions of nations, strategies, and power. But at its core, war is not about maps or politics. It is about people. It is about lives disrupted, families torn apart, and futures that are suddenly, and often permanently, taken away. A global conflict today would not resemble the wars of the past in its consequences. The scale of destruction would be far greater, and the reach would be truly worldwide. Entire cities could be reduced to ruins within moments, not over years. Infrastructure that supports daily life, hospitals, schools, water systems, could collapse almost instantly. And when these systems fail, it is not governments that suffer first, it is ordinary people. It is the child who cannot receive medical care, the parent who cannot provide food, the family that has nowhere left to go. One of the most immediate and devastating outcomes of such a conflict would be the loss of human life on an unimaginable scale. But beyond those who perish, there are those who survive, and sometimes survival itself becomes a different kind of hardship. Millions could be displaced from their homes, forced to flee in search of safety, becoming refugees in a world already struggling to accommodate them. Borders would tighten, resources would become scarce, and desperation would grow. And then comes the economic collapse that inevitably follows widespread conflict. In today's interconnected world, economies are deeply tied to one another. A disruption in one region quickly spreads across the globe. Trade routes would be affected, markets would crash, and currencies could lose their value. The price of basic necessities, food, fuel, medicine, would rise beyond the reach of many. Poverty would increase, and with it, suffering would multiply in ways that extend far beyond the battlefield. Food security, in particular, would become a critical issue. Agricultural systems depend on stability, on predictable climates, functioning supply chains, and access to resources. War disrupts all of this. Fields are abandoned, transportation is halted, and shortages begin to emerge. What starts as scarcity can quickly turn into famine, affecting not just one nation, but entire regions. And history has shown us that hunger often brings with it further instability and conflict, creating a cycle that is difficult to break. Perhaps one of the most sobering realizations is that in a modern global conflict, there would be no true safe zone. In the past, some regions could remain distant from the centers of war, but today, with global connectivity and advanced weaponry, the effects would ripple outward, touching nearly every corner of the world. Whether through direct impact or indirect consequences, no country, no community, and no individual would remain completely untouched. And so, when we speak about the possibility of a global war, we are not speaking about an abstract concept or a distant scenario. We are speaking about a reality that would affect each and every one of us in ways we may not yet fully comprehend, but once it begins, it may already be too late to turn back. After reflecting on the rising tensions, the dangerous transformation of warfare, and the devastating impact such a conflict would have on humanity, we are left with a question that is both urgent and unavoidable. What can be done? Is this path inevitable, or is there still time to change direction? And the answer, if we are honest with ourselves, is that the future is not yet written, but it is being shaped by the choices we make today. The first and most essential step is the revival of sincere diplomacy. Dialogue must not be seen as weakness, but as wisdom. Throughout history, some of the greatest conflicts could have been prevented if communication had not broken down. When nations stop speaking to one another, when mistrust replaces understanding, the door to conflict begins to open. But when leaders choose patience over pride and negotiation over confrontation, they create opportunities for peace, even in the most difficult circumstances. At the same time, international cooperation must go beyond words. It requires commitment, consistency, and a shared sense of responsibility. Global institutions, alliances, and agreements exist for a reason: to maintain balance, to resolve disputes, and to prevent escalation. But these systems only work when they are respected and upheld. When nations act solely in their own interest without regard for the greater good, the stability of the entire world is put at risk. However, this responsibility does not lie with governments alone. Every individual has a role to play, no matter how small it may seem. Awareness is powerful. When people understand what is at stake, they are less likely to be influenced by misinformation, fear, or hatred. They begin to see beyond borders, beyond politics, and recognize a shared humanity. And it is this recognition that builds the foundation for lasting peace. We must also be cautious of how easily division can spread among us. In times of tension, narratives of us versus them become more common, and they often lead to misunderstanding and hostility. But if we allow ourselves to be divided so easily, we are only making it easier for conflict to take root. Unity, empathy, and a willingness to listen to one another are not just moral values, they are safeguards against the very forces that drive the world toward war. And perhaps most importantly, there must be a conscious effort to prioritize peace over power. Strength is often measured in military capability, but true strength lies in restraint. It lies in the ability to step back when emotions run high, to choose wisdom when provoked, and to value human life above all else. These are not easy choices, especially in a world driven by competition and influence. But they are necessary if we are to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. The signs we see today are not a final verdict, they are a warning. And a warning, if taken seriously, is an opportunity. An opportunity to reflect, to act, and to change course before it is too late. Because in the end, the question is not whether the world is capable of another war. The question is whether we are wise enough to prevent it.